Well, Pilgrim, this town ain't big enough for the both of us. So how about flashlights at high noon? Hello, folks. This is Pastor Scott again with a couple of thoughts on what it means to be a child of the living God. Welcome to Aslan's Lair. When my sons were much younger, they loved to do a lot of nighttime rat patrols and adventuring. And of course, flashlights were a key part of that. Nothing to give a youngster a sense of power and control over the darkness like their own personal light source. So they could go out and fight off hordes of invading aliens or discover and drive off dens of dragons, whatever the flavor of the night was. But part of the key was that flashlight. And it's a very useful tool, no doubt about it. It's been said that bigger boys just have bigger toys. Well, with the advent of LEDs, one of my sons has been quite fascinated with the amount of lumens that can be put out into the darkness. A couple of years ago, we were making a trip up to some mountain lakes in central Idaho and had left after a swing shift. And so we're traveling in the middle of the night, about 2 a.m. My son decided he was going to try out his new headlamp, which had about 4 billion lumens, I believe, something like that. So we stopped and he turned that thing on, shone it out into the forest, and it lit it up. And at the time, we might have said, actually, wow, lighting this place up like high noon. Well, it might have seemed like it until you wait for high noon in the summer with the sun directly overhead, the real source of real light. And then you can turn on your wonderful super-powered flashlight, shine it off into the forest, and guess what you'll see? Nothing different than you did before you shone it out there, because it's outclassed. Flashlights at high noon is a useless concept. And so it is with us as human beings as we attempt to make our own way, set our own standards, invent, if you will, our own truth as we go along through life. One thing that is guaranteed when we do this, and it's happened countless times throughout human history for thousands of years, people have decided to reject God's guidelines. And eventually it ends up in a huge cultural train wreck and a gigantic reset, because it can't function long term. But we fool ourselves in the meantime. It's like right now. Goodness, I'm considered a dinosaur. Why? Well, I believe there are really only 2 genders. Count them, 1, 2. Now, interestingly, I can support that by science. You can do genetic testing, look at the chromosomes of any individual, virtually any. There might be the rare exception of a issue that someone has genetically, with a mutation. But with almost everyone on the planet, you can determine, yes, there are 2 X's, or there's an X and a Y. There's a male or female. Regardless of what other difficulties, struggles, confusions we may have, there are only 2 genders. But now, that makes me a dinosaur. I'm a hater. I am an ignorant, racist, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, choose your list of phobias. And that's what is hollered at me and has been thrown at me in order to shut me up, and others like me. It doesn't work. But the fact is, we develop these ideas. We are told that, well, sexual sin is a thing of the past. That's anachronistic. It has no place today. Whether heterosexual sin, anything outside of marriage between one man and one woman, or whether it's homosexual or bisexual or transsexual, or, my goodness, there's another list going. But the fact remains that we operate best within certain guidelines. I can pick up my own flashlight and say, oh, look here. Oh, this is what I believe. Here's truth. Here's my truth. And in the darkness, it can look okay. It can seem like it makes sense, no matter how foolish it is. But again, within the light of God's truth, all of a sudden that foolishness is shown for what it is. And the fact is that what seemed so enlightened and enlightening is in truth darkness. Jesus, speaking in John's Gospel, it's recorded for us. John chapter 8, verse 12. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. As we shared last week at Romans in chapter 1, we're told that the people rejected the truth. They denied God's truth and traded it in for a lie. But Jesus said, I am the truth. Whoever follows me. And of course, part of following, he made very clear, is listening and obeying. And so to ignore the truth, the light that God has brought and made so abundantly clear with Jesus. Remember that when God the Son came, the clarification that he brought was beyond amazing. It took so many concepts that existed and existed biblically in what we call the Old Testament, but we really didn't have a solid handle on them. Most of what we know about God, almost everything we know about God, is because we've learned it, we saw it, and continue to see it in Jesus of Nazareth, the God-man, the source of truth, the real light, the sun, as we talked about a little bit last week with flashlights on a sundial. You can make it tell anytime you want to in a dark room, but get out in the broad light of day, and there's only one true time at any given moment, and that's determined by the sunshine in the sky. Our truth is determined by the Son of God and God's truth, and that doesn't alter. I can deny God's truth. I can ignore God's truth. I can fight against God's truth. I can stand opposed, but I can't change it. In the end, all I have is my little flashlight shining pitifully into the light of day. There's no competition. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Because one thing I've discovered about flashlights is that the power source runs out at very inopportune times. God's truth isn't like that. The first elk that I ever got many, many moons ago, I got right at nightfall. And it was actually in the process of cleaning this animal with an old style huge flashlight stuck in my mouth when big, off went the light. I'm stuck there with deep night falling, a huge project ahead of me, and I can't see a thing. Fortunately, my dad came hoofing it up the hill right at that time. He'd heard the shots, and he came up from the cabin, and he came up with another flashlight. And so between the two of us, it became a very doable project. But when I was relying simply on my little source of light, pretty precarious. And at any time, any moment, it can be out. What we thought was so powerful a truth turns out to be nothing but shifting sands and a breath that goes away. Jesus says, I am the light. So flashlights at high noon, we can feel free to try, but it'll be useless. I don't want to fight against God's truth anymore. I want to do my best in the power of the Holy Spirit that he gives to operate according to his truths. But most of all, to love God and to love people. How do I know that? Because God has said it. And his word, his truth, is the real light. May God bless you real good, and shalom.